Thank you very much, Uri, for the kind introduction. And November 2023, we mark 56 years since the British withdrawal from the colony of Aden and the protectorate of South Arabia. Britain occupied Aden in 1839 primarily for its strategic position as a coaling station to the way to India, and also to protect its interest in the Red Sea basin vis-à-vis colonial aspirations by France and other world powers. This paper centers on the role played by Aden in the process of Jewish and Muslim emigrations from Yemen. From the late 19th century until mid-20th century, almost all the Jews left Yemen. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of Muslims left their homes and migrated to different destinations. My talk explains these emigration trends as understood from social and economic disruptions promoted by global political developments and from environmental disasters. I emphasize that migration is also linked to various pull factors and the availability of informal social networks that support immigrants and encourage the arrival of new ones. Since mid-19th century, global powers became prominent powers around the Red Sea basin. The French followed the British, and in early 1860s controlled Djibouti. The Ottoman Empire conquered the coastal Yemeni Red Sea plain in the mid-19th century and took over central Yemen in 1872. In the early 1880s, Italy also became a major competitor in the region when Italian forces landed in Ethiopia and later established the colony of Eritrea. The world powers' involvement in the Red Sea region brought about new activity in the area and strengthened relations between its two coasts. Foreign troops and administrators stationed in Aden, Yemen, and East Africa encouraged economic activities. By the turn of the 19th century, Aden and its hinterland became actively involved in the commercial networks that connected East Africa, Southern Arabia, Iraq, and India, and more. This trade included weapons and ammunition from the French port of Djibouti, agricultural products from Yemen, dates and some other products from Iraq, textile and spices from India, etc., etc. By mid-19th century, this city served as the main crossroad for the movement of commodities to and from Yemen. Moreover, since mid-19th century, Aden developed industrial activity by means of many small factories based on more advanced technology than in Yemen. In parallel to the above political and economic transformation, the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century registered repeated environmental disasters in Yemen. Prolonged droughts impaired living conditions in the Yemeni tribal rural areas and resulted in a considerable inner migration from the north to the southern Yemeni districts. For example, a prolonged drought in 1903 to 1905 caused starvation, epidemics, and great human suffering. Abraham Arusi, a contemporary Jewish writer, describes people wandering in the country in search of food. Many, I quote, dying of hunger on the roads, in houses, streets, markets, and deserts. In desperation, a father would not have mercy on his son, and a son would not have mercy on his father. Each would care for his own soul, to fill his stomach because he is starving. Political instability too contributed to process of migration. For about 40 years following the Ottoman occupation, Central Iran turned into a war zone where the rebellious tribes attacked the Ottomans. In late 1904, Imam Yahya Hamiduddin put Sana'a on siege. Thereafter, food scarcity in the city brought terrible famine and death to thousands. Contemporary writers recount people selling everything they owned for food, and even eating donkeys, dogs, cats, and rats. Wasi, a Yemeni historian, estimates that close to half of the city's inhabitants perished of hunger. Military uprisings stopped only in 1911 following an agreement between the Ottomans and Imam Yahya, the Da'an agreement. This warfare, scarcity, and famine pushed the Yemeni population away from the battlefields and contributed to the migration trend of Muslims and Jews. In addition to internal migration, the aforementioned social and economic disruptions led to widespread labor migration. Aden, which had many small sweatshops, attracted cheap Yemeni labor and became a major destination for such migration. Many of the Yemeni Jewish migrants came to Aden, some of them for certain periods, earned some money, and then went back home. Others settled in Aden, finding livelihood as day manual workers, and some developed small businesses. Across the Red Sea, there were other locations that attracted Jewish and Muslim migrant laborers. Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Egypt, which like Aden were ruled by Western colonialist powers. Many of these migrants started their journey to Africa from Aden. Moreover, there were Yemeni Jewish migrants who joined the Adeni Jewish settlements that were created in East Africa. A number of Adeni Jews entered the Indian-British commercial network and later expanded their business activities to the coast of East Africa. Menachem Mesa, mentioned quite a few times in this conference, and his sons led the most renowned business enterprise. Benin, son of Menachem Mesa, who succeeded his father, expanded the family economic endeavors and established commercial outposts in several places in Africa. Other Adeni Jews are recorded as having founded commercial colonies in Eritrea in the 1890s and formed thriving trading communities in the port town of Massawa and in Asmara. These Adeni settlements attracted Jewish migrants from inland Yemen, some of whom remained in Africa. Others, again like migrant laborers, stayed for months or even for years, and then returned home. During the Ottoman period, Yemen experienced an expansion of economic activity which benefited some Jews in the center of the country. At that time, Yemen became increasingly linked to the global economy and opened its markets to imported industrial products. These goods entered through the Red Sea port of Hodeidah and mainly through Aden. The imported commodities competed with local goods in both quality and cost, consequently undermining the traditional infrastructure of the Jewish economy, which was based on the crafts and on cottage industry. By the end of the 19th century, Jews were being pushed from the crafts into retail trade, especially to peddling. Part of these Jews joined the Muslim migration trend to Aden and sought work in its workshops, in services, and small retail trade. Many unable to make a living there continued for Aden to East Africa, as I mentioned earlier. Especially in the 1920s, this period of time witnessed the increased movement of Jewish artisans regularly migrating to East Africa. Muslims and Jews shared similar push factors for migrations. However, in time, the destinations for their immigration diverged. While the land of Israel became the favored destination for Jewish immigrants, the main destination for Muslim immigrants became Saudi Arabia after the 1938 discovery of oil. Of course, Muslims also migrated to other localities in the Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere, even to the United States at this period of time. Thus, in 1881, in parallel to migrating to East Africa, began the process of Jewish immigration to Palestine. This movement is primarily tied to the 1872 Ottoman conquest of Yemen, which generated a new context of a large empire whose citizens could travel unhindered from one place to another within its borders. Awareness of the development of Jewish settlements in Palestine and
Just can you hold it?
I hold it.
Yeah, yes.
This way. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Awareness of the development of Jewish settlement in Palestine, and especially in Jerusalem, stirred great interest among Yemeni Jews and inspired immigration there. The factors of disruptions that had encouraged emigration were now combined with Yemeni Jews' traditional and religious attachment to the Holy Land. Therefore, up until 1914, circa 8% of the Jewish population of Yemen immigrated to Palestine. Most of them traveled from the port of Aden. This movement ceased during World War I and was renewed in 1920 in post-Ottoman era under Imam Yahya, who was recognized as Yemen's leader. However, at the end of 1922, in response to pleas by Palestinian Arab leaders, the Imam prohibited Jews from leaving Yemen. Jews were now unable to depart from the Red Sea port of Hodeidah, even though only a few of them did, because this port was controlled by the Imam, and Aden became the sole way out. The Imam ban on Jewish immigration was enforced in central Yemen, but not in the rural tribal districts where most of the Jews lived. Thus, Jews continued to travel from the southern Yemeni regions. They would cross the border to the British protectorate and arrive in Aden, which became the getaway to Palestine. It is pertinent to note that throughout the entire period of the Jewish presence in Yemen, no Zionist organizations were active within Yemen. Its Immigration Bureau, established in 1928 in the British colony of Aden, manifested the Zionist organization's chief involvement in the Yemeni immigration. This bureau assisted immigrants with travel arrangements and distributed immigration certificates to Jews who left Yemen and arrived in Aden and were waiting for their turn to immigrate. Nevertheless, in 1943, Imam Yahya changed his policy toward Jewish migration, from prohibition to turning a blind eye. What made the Imam to change his mind? During the wartime, the World War II, especially 42 and 44, but especially during the time of the war, Yemen suffered again from prolonged drought, famine, and deadly epidemics, which affected Jews and Muslims alike. These events ensued a considerable emigration movement. The British scholar Robert Stuckey maintains that during the 1940s, between 1/5 to 1/4 of Yemen's population, about 1 million people, and a few people agreeing with me, about 1 million people, it's amazing. These people emigrated. Ian Walker estimated that during the famine years of 43-44, circa 1/3 of the population of southern Yemen, especially from Hadramaut, 1/3 died, 1/3 emigrated, and only 1/3 remained. At the background of these happenings, toward the end of 1942, when the terrible fate of European Jews and the horrors of the Holocaust became well known, the Jewish Agency transferred immigration certificates to Jews from Muslim countries. Yemeni Jews knew of the available certificates waiting in Aden and distributed by the Zionist Immigration Bureau, and many departed toward the port city. This is when the Imam just ignored. He didn't stop anybody, even those who came from the center of left of the center of the country, even from Sana'a. In 1943, the number of Yemeni Jews who arrived in Palestine was greater than from any other country. The departure of Jews in this period openly merged with the general trend of Yemeni Muslim emigration. We can understand that the Imam attitude, it was intended to ease the economic pressure and the social pressure inside Yemen. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and following a permission by Imam Ahmad in May 49 to leave Yemen, between 1948 and 51, the Yemeni Jewish community uprooted willingly, almost entirely, and resettled in Israel. I mentioned only a few pull factors that nourished this migration movement, which, as I mentioned, movement which was initiated in late 19th century. I will name only a few. Firstly, traditional and religious attraction to the Holy Land. Its accessibility as an Ottoman province, equal civil rights, improved quality of life, and the availability, which is very important, availability of social capital created by Yemeni immigrants during the Ottoman era. The veteran immigrants encouraged relatives and acquaintances to join them and provided vital resources for the newcomers in social and economic matters. In conclusion, my paper discusses the complex movement of huge numbers of people who left Yemen during the second half of the 19th century until the mid-20th century. In this process, Aden, our protagonist, was heavily involved in some major issues. Aden, as an arm of colonial Britain, contributed to social disruptions which incited this migration movement. Global political changes in the Red Sea area, of which Aden acted as a leading party, affected this geographical space, causing remarkable transformations to its economy, society, and demographic makeup. These changes enabled those who feared economic distress, famine, disease, and warfare to live and look for shelter and livelihood elsewhere. Secondly, the colony of Aden and the protectorate of South Arabia participated in this migration movement not only as provokers, but also as attracting migrants and as absorbing them in its economy and society. These immigrants, blue-collar laborers, merchants, and others contributed to Aden's social makeup and further enhanced Aden's economic development. Thirdly, Aden served as a valuable temporary harbor for Muslim and Jewish migrants in their voyage to other desired destinations. This role was crucial for Jewish migrants who wished to travel to Palestine and later to Israel, but were stuck in their colony or in the protectorate, sometimes for years, for lack of immigration certificates, in terrible, harsh conditions, which were mentioned and discussed earlier by Danny and especially by Danny before me, Danny Balmawis. And I mentioned a fourth issue. Between 49 and 51, the Aden authorities cooperated and facilitated the flying of about 50,000 people, almost the entire Jewish community, to the state of Israel. Thank you.